Hello, class, and welcome to today's virtual lecture. I'm actually going to first invite you to pause this video because we're going to start today with a class engagement quiz. So once again, you can go ahead and pause this video and open up Scholar, and please complete that very brief class engagement quiz on the introduction and chapter 1 to Righteous Dope Fiend. Again, please pause this video and take the quiz right now. When you have completed that quiz, you can go ahead and continue to watch the rest of today's lecture. All right, so I'll assume by this point you've completed the class engagement quiz. Good job. Today's lecture is going to help orient you to the text of Righteous Dope Fiend. Once again, we're continuing to talk about what is referred to as public anthropology, applied anthropology, engaged anthropology. All these terms are used to refer to essentially the same subfield of anthropology in which we are applying anthropology to help solve human problems, both near and far. And I'm especially in this lecture going to try to give you certain tools, theoretical tools. I'm going to break down some of the concepts that do emerge in the introduction that I actually don't think the interlocutors do a great job of making accessible to folks. So I'm going to kind of scaffold this reading. So if there's a concept or a couple of pages in the intro that you're really confused by, hopefully after today's lecture, some of that material will be cleared up. Righteous Dope Fiend can be a difficult text, but it's not difficult, I think, in terms of of the reading level, right, of the difficulty of the text, but it can be difficult in the sense, again, that the authors throw concepts from theory into the text without actually thoroughly explaining them first. I'd like us to first look at this review of Righteous Dope Fiend from Christopher Shea. Okay, there we go. Righteous Dope Fiend has both concrete and abstract aspects too. At one moment, it relates a harrowing tale, often written in the first person by either of our two ethnographers. That story will be followed by an extended riff on theory. Delete the theory, and you've got several seasons of The Wire, only grimmer. Now, some of you might be familiar already with the HBO series, The Wire. I readily admit that I myself have not seen The Wire, although I think it's added in my queue of things to watch. I'm going to invite you to now go ahead, again, also on Scholar. I'm sorry, hopefully you didn't close that tab. And you will find a scene from The Wire that I have put up on Scholar. Should be in a link with clips, right? Clips from lecture. Go ahead and find that. And also, I want you to watch that clip. But as you do so, I'd like to give this content warning that there is racist language that is being used in this clip. But we'll talk about that more in just a second. So please first go ahead and watch this scene from The Wire. Okay, I'll assume at this point that you have gone ahead and watched that scene. There are several different things in this clip that I think are actually going to be useful to you as you think about this ethnography. One is that, of course, this show, right, introduces viewers to the role of or the relationship between race and policing and what it means to live with addiction, right? And these things are all intertwined, and these are all themes that are key to Righteous Dope Fiend, alongside, of course, the central theme of what it means to be living as an unhoused person in California, an issue, unfortunately, that has only gotten worse since this text came out. Why do you think, Bourgeois and Schonberg use problematic language in the ethnography? You have already seen this, right? Even the chapters you've already read, that there's lots of language that might have made you uncomfortable to simply read, not even to hear aloud. Why do you think they would have used that language? Well, this is because as anthropologists, we listen to what people say in their own words, right? We take the language that interlocutors use very seriously, even if it's language that is racist, sexist, excuse me, homophobic, right? Bourgeois and Schonberg take interlocutors at their word. And like any good anthropologist, they're trying to capture the worldview, right, of these interlocutors, worldviews which might be right, sexist, racist, homophobic, etc. So even if it's problematic, right, it's important to capture that language because it tells us something about how they understand race and gender, for example, in their communities. And lastly, and on that point, we come to this phrase, right, just doping, right, this identity category, because this is actually how interlocutors referred to themselves, right? This is the term that community members in these communities use to describe themselves, right? Dope fiend. And this is a word that also comes right out of that clip that you just saw, right? Because they are dope fiends. All right. I'd like you to, and here we have our two ethnographers, and Bourgeois is actually a very famous anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, who has spent much of his career looking at relationship between what it means to live with alongside drug addiction and in communities of color in the United States, in neighborhoods that are heavily policed, etc. And excuse me, Schonberg is a photographer. So he's really more of like a photojournalist necessarily than an ethnographer. But my question to you is, and I do want you to take a second and actually reflect, perhaps write this down. If you have your, I'm assuming you obviously have your laptops open, go ahead and type out your reflection. This will help you remember and be able to recall some of this information when we come to the final exam. How is this ethnography different from Number Our Days or Made in Madagascar, the two other ethnographies we've read for this course? How is it different in terms of tone, in terms of goals, in terms of approach, in terms of the kind of language? If you'd like some more time, go ahead and pause this video. Otherwise, we will continue now to talk about other aspects of this text. And I look forward to discussing that question and others when we meet in person. I think there's a lot to dissect when we think about really the richness of this ethnography, what it brings to our course. So one thing that that sets this ethnography apart from many other ethnographies is that it was written by two people. Anthropology is a discipline, cultural anthropology specifically is one in which we've long kind of, in many ways, I would say, suffered from this myth of the lone anthropologist, this idea that there's, as an anthropologist, you go alone to a single place to become an expert in that particular cultural milieu, language, etc. That's all good and important, but sometimes having two people work on one project, it's just better, right? The two people, they have their own strengths, and every person has their individual strengths and weaknesses. So when you have a team that's coming together, as they had for this text, remember they had worked on this project for years, many, many years, and had many, many, many graduate students help them by gathering, doing participant observation and interviews. These graduate students aren't, their names aren't on the front of this book, but it was really more actually than two people who helped them pull this all together. So as you read the ethnography, as I've noted here, please take a look at the photographs. In many ways, this is a kind of photo ethnography, I think one could argue, which is really quite interesting. So again, Schonberg is the photographer. They themselves call this a photo ethnography. So photographs play a really active role in this ethnography, more so than most other ethnographies. So again, it's, this is one thing that makes it stand apart. It's the fact that it's photo ethnography. Also, the fact that 2 anthropologists have wrote this book, although actually it was many more than 2, as I've just noted. But again, as you read, pay attention to the photographs as you read the text and ask yourself, what do you see as the purpose of including photographs in this ethnography, or perhaps of any ethnography? Do you think the photographs help or hinder the narrative that's embedded in the ethnography, the ethnographic narrative? And what sorts of ethical dilemmas do you think might come from including photographs in an ethnography, but especially an ethnography that's dealing with the issues that this ethnography deals with? So these are all questions, again, that we will be discussing over the next few classes. So our anthropologists ask in this text, what are the lived dimensions of social suffering, right? On a societal level, of course, here they're thinking about the relationship between the individual and society, right? But a kind of suffering that's not simply physical, but also social in terms of the role of stigma, right? In the experiences of the interlocutors, that is those people that you will be reading about in this text. They're trying to make visible their humanity, that is the humanity of their interlocutors, even in the most inhumane of circumstances. And again, it's really powerful to think about these interlocutors, these stories, because this is an issue that has only gotten worse over the past few years. Now, ethnography is the tool that they use to tell these stories, to make visible their humanity. And this is something that I have been trying to argue throughout the course of this semester, right, is that there is an important role for ethnography in our lives. It's how we tell stories about ourselves, about others, to both ourselves and to others, right? It's central to what it means to be kind of an empathetic human. And they're doing that both in terms of narrative, in terms of text, but also in terms of images, of photography, right? And they talk very specifically about cultural relativism and ethnocentrism on page 7. I invite you to go back to that page and look that up. They're doing field work at home, right? And we have read, Barbara Meyerhoff's text, which was also based in California. Most of this semester, though, I've been trying to push you students to think about cultures that are very different from your own, right? Anthropology often plays that role in the university. Many other disciplines in the university will primarily focus on societies in Western Europe or in North America, or maybe, so once in a while, society in India or China, right? But we want to think of all societies, including those that are seen as not having quote unquote economic value, perhaps, right? The stereotype, of course, is that anthropologists work in rural villages and faraway places, and sometimes they do, including myself in Madagascar, right? But as you've seen this semester, I've also tried to give you readings like this one, where anthropologists, contemporary anthropologists, are working everywhere, from Wall Street to California. And this ethnography very much continues in that vein, right, where we're looking at and thinking about communities in the United States. But here's what's interesting, right, is that like this is in the United States, but it's actually probably for many of you a culture, a subculture that is quite foreign, right? How much do we know about what it means to be an unhoused person today? Some of you might know something about that. I don't know, right? But I imagine many of you do not know much about that on a personal level, right? And again, so this is about, based on persistent observation of these individuals living in the margin of society from 1994 to 2006. And again, it's deeply depressing to think about how much worse the issue has gotten from 2006 to today. What's powerful about this text is that our interlocutors, Bergros and Schonberg, do not argue that unhoused interlocutors living with drug addiction in the Bay Area are victims. Right? They're rejecting the victim narrative, but they're also rejecting this narrative that they're heroes. Right? They're not trying to romanticize them. They're trying to paint a realistic, complicated, nuanced portrait of their lives. Okay, I'm going to pause this here and you will continue the lecture on part 2, which will follow here.